The Chamber of Voices had not admitted a human in 11 years, not since the last one was carried out. Elena Voss knew this. She had studied the transcripts, the recordings, the silence that followed each failed appeal. She walked the long corridor toward the chamber doors anyway alone because Earth had no one left to send with her. The fleet that should have escorted her had been destroyed 3 months earlier over the Cassari debris field. There had been no survivors. There had been no replacement ships. She carried nothing but a data slate and a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. The paper held 600 million names. It would never leave that pocket. No one in the chamber would ask to see it, and she would not offer it because grief was not currency here. Only proof was currency here. The doors were 40 meters tall, carved from a black alloy that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Two Kalian sentries stood beside them, their exoskeletons plated in ceremonial red, their 4 eyes tracking her without blinking. Neither moved to open the doors for her. She opened them herself, both hands flat against cold metal, and pushed. The chamber beyond was a bowl of light and silence. 900 delegates seated in concentric rings that rose toward a domed ceiling of captured starlight. Every species that had survived first contact with the threshold sat somewhere in that bowl. Every species that had chosen extinction rather than surrender did not. Elena understood, standing in the doorway, that the difference between those two outcomes was the entire reason she had come. No delegate spoke as she crossed the floor. Her footsteps were the only sound in a room built to hold 900 voices, and that silence was its own verdict. She had read about this moment in the briefing packets Earth's diplomatic corps had assembled before the corps itself was disbanded for lack of ships, lack of funding, lack of anyone left willing to serve. The packets had called it the long walk. They had not prepared her for how long 40 meters could feel, when every eye in the room believed you were already defeated. She stopped at the podium reserved for petitioning species. It was a small platform, unadorned, built low enough that every seated delegate looked down at whoever stood there. Earth had petitioned from this platform 4 times in the past decade. 4 times the Council had voted to table the request indefinitely, which was the polite word for refusal. There would not be a 5th attempt if this one failed. There would not be an Earth left to attempt it. The Speaker of the Council rose from the central ring. Its body was a column of shifting crystal, light moving through it the way blood moved through veins, and when it spoke, the sound came from everywhere in the chamber at once rather than from any single point. Ambassador Voss, you stand alone. I do, Elena said. Her voice did not shake, though she had practiced not shaking for 6 hours the night before, alone in a borrowed apartment on a station that was not hers, on a world that was not Earth. My delegation did not survive the journey here. We are aware, the speaker said. The threshold fleet that destroyed your escort has grown bolder in the systems adjacent to your homeworld. Some among this council interpret that as evidence your species is already lost. A dying thing does not require rescue, it requires only witness. Elena had known this argument would come. She had rehearsed against it in the mirror until the words stopped sounding like her own grief and started sounding like fact. I am not here to be witnessed, she said. I am here to present evidence that Earth is not dying. I am here to present evidence that Earth is the only power in this quadrant capable of stopping what is coming for the rest of you. A murmur moved through the rings, not disbelief exactly, but something colder. Contempt dressed as patience. She had expected that too. The speaker's crystal body dimmed slightly, a gesture Elena had learned meant something between a frown and a warning. 4 petitions, 4 refusals. Explain to this council why a 5th attempt merits different consideration than the previous 4. Because the previous 4 asked for help, Elena said, this one is offering it. The words landed harder than she expected. Several delegates shifted in their seats, plated limbs scraping against stone risers, and for a moment the chamber's practiced stillness cracked into something like attention. She let the silence stretch a half-second longer than comfortable before continuing, because she had learned from 600 years of human diplomatic history that silence, used correctly, was its own kind of weapon. 11 years ago, the threshold entered this quadrant, she said. In that time, 4 member species have been reduced to fragments. 3 more have withdrawn from contact with everyone, including this council, because isolation felt safer than alliance. Every strategy this body has attempted against the threshold has failed. Every weapon this body has fielded has been matched, countered, or simply ignored. And you propose Earth succeeds where 900 delegates have not, said a voice from the second ring. It belonged to a Sevrathi elder, her 4 arms crossed in the universal posture of a mind already made up. Your species has fielded no weapon against the threshold. Your species has fielded no fleet capable of engaging it. What precisely are you offering, Ambassador, beyond desperation dressed in a uniform? Elena reached into her coat, not toward the folded paper but toward the data slate beside it. She placed it on the podium's projection surface and the chamber's central column of light bent to display what she had carried across 4 systems and 1 destroyed escort fleet to show them. It was not a weapon schematic. It was not a fleet manifest. It was a single decrypted transmission, time-stamped, sourced, and translated into the Council's shared trade language. 8 months ago, she said, a threshold vessel was disabled during an engagement near what remains of the Kesari colonies. Not destroyed, disabled. My people boarded it before it could self-terminate, which is what every previous engagement report told this council was impossible. We did not defeat that ship with weapons superior to yours. We defeated it because we understood something about the threshold that 900 delegates apparently do not. The chamber's silence had changed texture. It was no longer contempt. It was calculation, 900 minds recalculating a variable they had assumed fixed. The speaker's crystal form, brightened by a degree Elena recognized from the briefing packets as genuine interest, rare enough that Earth's intelligence division had flagged it as a diplomatic event in its own right. "I'll continue," the speaker said. "The threshold does not communicate," Elena said. "This council has spent 11 years operating on that assumption, and it is wrong. The threshold communicates constantly. It simply does not communicate in any register this council's translation architecture was built to recognize." She activated the second file on her slate. The projection shifted, and the chamber filled with a waveform pattern, jagged and dense, scrolling across the display like a heartbeat recorded by something that had never possessed a heart. This is the signal traffic recovered from the disabled vessel's internal network. Your analysts, if you check the records this council maintains from prior engagements, dismissed patterns like this as background noise, mechanical interference. We did not dismiss it, because one of my analysts noticed something your architecture could not. And that was, the Sevrathi elder asked, her arms no longer crossed. It repeats, Elena said, not randomly, not mechanically. It repeats the way grief repeats. The way a species mourns something it lost so long ago it no longer remembers losing it, only remembers the shape of the absence. She let the waveform continue scrolling behind her, unbroken, relentless. The threshold is not an invading force, speaker. It is a refugee species. It has been running from something for longer than this council has existed. And every world it destroys because it believes that world is what's hunting it. The chamber did not erupt into noise the way Elena had half expected from her diplomatic training. It went silent instead, a silence so total she could hear the faint hum of the projection equipment, and in that silence she understood she had just said something no delegate in that room had permission to consider true. 900 years of institutional certainty did not bend easily, and she watched several delegates' postures harden rather than soften, defensive rather than curious. "This is unverified," said a delegate from the outer ring, a Threll representative whose species had lost an entire colony world to threshold incursion 4 years earlier. His voice carried no calculation, only old and unhealed anger. "You ask this council to reconsider 11 years of loss based on a theory extracted from a single disabled vessel, presented by a species with no fleet, no colonies beyond its own dying homeworld, and no standing in this chamber beyond the goodwill this council extends out of pity. I ask this council to reconsider nothing, Elena said. I ask this council to listen to evidence it has never possessed before because no species before Earth boarded a threshold vessel and survived long enough to bring the data home. You do not have to believe me. You only have to review what I am presenting because if I am wrong, you have lost nothing but an afternoon. If I am right, you have spent 11 years fighting something that could have been reasoned with. And every world you lost in that time was a world that did not have to fall. The Threll representative did not respond. His silence was not agreement. It was the silence of a man being asked to reconsider a grief he had built his entire remaining purpose around, and Elena understood watching him that this argument would not be won in a single exchange. It would be won cumulatively, fact by fact, until the weight of evidence outpaced the weight of loss. She had 4 systems worth of data still unpresented. She intended to present all of it. The speaker raised a crystalline limb, and the chamber's murmur settled into the particular quiet that preceded formal challenge. The council will hear rebuttal before further evidence is entered. Delegate Threlkarn, you object to the premise. State your objection formally. Threlkarn rose from his seat, and Elena watched the old grief in his posture reshape itself into something sharper, more procedural, a weapon he clearly knew how to use. My objection is not merely to the premise, speaker. My objection is to the source. Earth petitioned this council for military aid 4 times. 4 times, this council determined Earth's contribution to any alliance would be negligible, its technology insufficient, its fleet incapable of meaningful engagement. Now, absent any change in that assessment, this ambassador arrives claiming her species alone has solved what 900 delegates could not. I have not claimed Earth solved anything alone, Elena said. I have claimed Earth observed something this council's existing frameworks were not built to observe. There is a difference between solving a war and understanding why it is being fought. A distinction that costs this council nothing to reject and everything to accept, Threlkarn said. If we accept your framing, speaker, we accept that 11 years of defensive doctrine built on the assumption that the threshold is an aggressor incapable of negotiation requires complete revision. We accept that member species who died defending their worlds, believing they were defending against annihilation, may have died fighting something that could have been reasoned with. That is not a small revision, Ambassador. That is an indictment. Elena had not expected the argument to arrive from this angle, and for a moment she understood she was not simply presenting evidence. She was asking an entire council to reconsider whether its dead had died for a purpose, and grief did not yield to data easily, no matter how sound the data was. She chose her next words carefully, aware that the wrong ones could collapse 11 years of hostility into something even harder to reverse. I am not asking this council to believe those deaths were meaningless, she said. I am asking this council to consider that they do not have to continue. The threshold has not stopped attacking because this council has not stopped assuming it cannot be reasoned with. Every engagement doctrine currently in use treats communication attempts as tactically irrelevant. I am telling you they are not irrelevant. I am telling you my people tried, once, under desperate circumstances, and it worked long enough to save the lives of everyone aboard that disabled vessel's boarding party. Worked how? The speaker asked, and something in its tone had shifted. The crystalline light within it moving in patterns Elena's briefing packets had never described, because no ambassador had gotten far enough into a session to observe it before. Elena activated the 3rd file. This one was not data. It was a recording, audio only 22 seconds long, and she let it play into the chamber's total silence before she said another word. The recording was not language, not in any sense the chamber's translation architecture would recognize as language. It was tonal, layered, 3 distinct frequencies moving against and around each other in a pattern that felt less like communication and more like mourning set to sound. When it ended, the chamber remained silent for 4 full seconds, an eternity in a room built for constant deliberation. That is a threshold vessel. Elena said, responding to a signal my boarding team transmitted after recovering enough of its internal architecture to attempt contact. We did not ask it to surrender. We did not ask it to explain itself. We played it a recording of Earth's own dead, a memorial broadcast my people maintain in orbit around a destroyed colony, because one of my analysts theorized the threshold's repeating signal pattern was itself a form of memorial. We were testing whether it would recognize the concept. And this was its response, the speaker said. It was not quite a question. This was its response, Elena confirmed. 22 seconds. Then the vessel powered down its remaining weapons systems entirely. It did not attack the boarding party. It did not attempt to self-terminate, which every previous engagement report in this council's archive states is the threshold's universal response. To capture, it simply stopped. My analysts believe it recognized what it was hearing, even without shared language, because grief does not require shared language to be understood as grief. The Sevrathi elder had gone very still, her forearms folded not in dismissal now but in something closer to old memory. My species lost 11 colony worlds to the threshold, she said quietly, and for the first time since Elena had entered the chamber, a delegate's voice carried something other than procedural distance. 11. I have sat in this chamber for 6 years listening to reports that describe an enemy incapable of reason, incapable of anything but destruction. And I built my understanding of this war on that description, because it was the only description this council ever offered me. You are telling me that description may have been incomplete. I am telling you it may have been wrong, Elena said, and she did not soften the word because softening it would have been its own kind of dishonesty. Not maliciously wrong. Wrong because no one before Earth survived contact intimate enough to learn otherwise. That is not an accusation against this council. That is a gap in the evidence this council has always had to work with, and I am here because Earth closed that gap at a cost I do not think this chamber fully understands yet. Threlkarn's posture had not softened, but his silence had lengthened, and Elena recognized in it the particular stillness of a man doing arithmetic he did not want to complete. What cost? He asked, and his voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness. The boarding team that recovered this data did not survive extraction, Elena said. The threshold vessel powered its weapons back online 11 minutes after the recording you just heard, once its systems recalculated the boarding party as a continued threat rather than a source of the signal it recognized. Contact was not sustained. It was a single moment, long enough to prove the theory, not long enough to build on it. 6 of my people died confirming what I am telling this council today. I am not asking you to trust a theory. I am asking you to honor the price my species already paid to bring it to you. The chamber did not erupt. It did something Elena's briefing packets had never described happening in 11 years of failed petitions. It deliberated openly, delegate speaking over delegate, not in hostility but in the particular chaos of 900 minds confronting a fact none of them had permission to have considered before. The speaker allowed it to continue for nearly a full minute before raising both crystalline limbs, and the chamber settled reluctantly into something resembling order. The council will proceed to formal question, the speaker said. Ambassador Voss, you have presented evidence suggesting the threshold may be capable of communication under specific conditions, evidence purchased at cost to your own personnel. You have not yet stated what you are requesting of this body. State it now. Elena had rehearsed this moment more than any other because everything before it had been evidence, and evidence alone had never been enough to move this council in 11 years of trying. I am not requesting military aid, she said. I am not requesting resources, ships, or intervention on Earth's behalf. Earth has survived 11 years without this council's assistance, and Earth will continue to survive with or without a vote in its favor today. I am requesting something smaller, and I believe more difficult for this body to grant. State it, the speaker said again, and the crystal light within it had steadied into something Elena read cautiously, as attention rather than skepticism. I am requesting a seat, Elena said, not a favor. not charity extended to a dying species out of pity, which is how every previous petition from Earth has been framed and rejected. A seat with full standing because Earth is the only power in this quadrant that has demonstrated a viable path toward ending this war through means other than mutual extinction. If this council intends to pursue that path, it requires the species that discovered it, and it requires that species treated as an equal participant rather than a supplicant standing at a podium built to be looked down upon. The silence that followed was different from every silence before it. It was not contempt and it was not calculation. It was the specific quiet of an institution recognizing that the terms of its own authority were being renegotiated in real time by a delegate with no fleet, no escort, and nothing but a data slate and evidence purchased with 6 lives. Threlkarn rose again, slower this time, and when he spoke his voice carried none of its earlier procedural sharpness. This council has never granted full standing to a species petitioning from a position of survival rather than strength. There is no precedent for what you are asking. There was no precedent for surviving contact with a disabled threshold vessel either, Elena said. Precedent is not evidence that something cannot be done. It is only evidence that no one has done it yet. The speaker turned toward the assembled rings, and its voice, when it came, carried a formality Elena recognized from the briefing packets as the language reserved for binding council action. The chamber will vote on the petition of Ambassador Elena Voss, representing the sovereign world of Earth, requesting full standing membership within this council on the basis of evidence presented regarding the nature of the threshold incursion. Delegates will register through standard protocol. So the vote will be recorded and bindings. Elena stood at the podium as the chamber's projection surface shifted to display 900 points of light, one for each delegate, dark until a vote was cast. She had expected to feel something in this moment, some culmination of 6 hours of rehearsal and 4 systems of travel, and a folded paper in her pocket that held 600 million names she would never read aloud. Instead, she felt only the particular emptiness of having said everything true that she knew how to say, with nothing left to add, and nothing left to do but wait. The first points of light began to appear scattered across the rings, and Elena made herself watch each one rather than tallying them, because tallying them felt like assuming an outcome she had no right to assume. The Sevrathi Elder's light appeared early, steady, and unhesitating. Threlkarn's appeared later, after a pause long enough that Elena understood it had cost him something, some private negotiation with 11 years of grief that she would never fully understand and had no right to ask about. The lights continued to accumulate, ring by ring, delegate by delegate, until the projection surface held a pattern Elena could no longer avoid reading, and she understood, watching it resolve, that the vote had not simply passed. It had passed with a margin that made clear the chamber's 11 years of hostility toward Earth had not been unanimous conviction. It had been institutional inertia, waiting for someone to arrive with evidence heavy enough to break it. The speaker's crystal form brightened until it was nearly white, and its voice, when it came, carried the same formal weight it had carried announcing the vote, though something beneath the formality had shifted. The petition of Earth is granted. Full standing is recognized, effective immediately, with all rights and obligations of membership extended accordingly. Ambassador Voss, this council formally acknowledges your species' contribution to the current understanding of the threshold incursion, and formally acknowledges the cost your people bore in securing that understanding. Elena did not smile. She had not smiled once since entering the chamber, and she did not smile now, because the 6 people who had died confirming the theory she had just spent an hour defending were not in this room to see the vote pass, and the 600 million names in her pocket were not restored by a council's recognition. What she felt instead was quieter than triumph, heavier than relief, something closer to the specific exhaustion of having carried a weight alone for exactly as long as it needed to be carried and no longer. This council does not yet know what comes next, she said, and her voice, for the first time since she had crossed the chamber floor, carried something unrehearsed. Full standing does not end this war. It does not undo 11 years of loss, and it does not restore what my species and every species in this room has already buried. It only means we now face what comes next together, rather than each of us facing it alone. And I believe that is the only advantage that has ever mattered in a war like this one. The chamber did not respond with applause. It was not built for applause, and Elena would not have wanted it if it were. It responded instead with the particular stillness of 900 delegates absorbing the fact that the terms of their war had just changed irreversibly in ways none of them yet understood the full shape of. Elena gathered her data slate from the podium, and the folded paper remained in her pocket unread because some things were not owed to a chamber. They were owed only to the dead, who could no longer ask for anything at all. She turned from the podium and walked back across the chamber floor, 40 meters of silence that no longer felt like judgment, though it did not feel like welcome either. It felt like something the council itself did not yet have language for, an alliance built not on strength or pity but on evidence too heavy to ignore. And Elena understood, reaching the great black doors, that she had not won anything resembling victory. She had only earned Earth the right to keep fighting, on terms that no longer required fighting. G alone, and for a war with no end yet in sight, she understood that would have to be enough. The doors closed behind her without sound. Somewhere beyond them, in a chamber that had not admitted a human in 11 years, 900 delegates began the long work of understanding what they had just voted into being. Elena walked the corridor back toward the transport that would carry her home, alone, the way she had arrived, and did not look back.